Got 100 Steps to Go. Tonight I'll Make It 99 by rayrae118. Chapter 4. 2 days into August, Harry, Ginny, Neville, Sirius, Remus and Bill gathered shortly before 10 o'clock at night in the sitting room at McGonagall Castle. Minerva wished she could come as well, but she had been acting as headmistress ever since Dumbledore's fall from the astronomy tower. She simply could not spend an entire night searching for the horcrux. When they were all gathered, Sirius turned to the teenagers, his expression as determined and serious as they had ever seen.
"All right, you three. I know we agreed that you could come, but I want to make sure you understand the gravity of this situation. We are giving you 1 night, and we've got a lot of ground to cover. But most importantly, if you find something, do not approach. Get all of us, and we'll figure out what to do from there. I cannot stress this enough."
He looked at each of them.
"Do not attempt to take on any defences by yourself, because you know if there is a horcrux there, it will have defences."
Harry nodded, his expression sombre.
"Don't worry, Sirius. We won't try to play hero."
Sirius sighed but accepted the promise as Ginny and Neville nodded their agreement.
"All right, let's get going. Harry, take my arm. Ginny with Bill, and Neville with Remus. We're operating to a location about 5 miles away from Little Hangleton, and we'll approach on foot."
The teenagers heeded Sirius's instructions, grasping onto the adults, and a moment later they had all disappeared from the sitting room at McGonagall Castle. It was an exhausted and disappointed group that apparated back to the castle around 6 o'clock the next morning. They all flopped down onto various pieces of furniture, still displeased at how the night had gone. "Well, that could have gone better," Neville commented idly, closing his eyes as the tiredness swept over him. Harry glanced over and raised an eyebrow.
"That's one way to put it," he replied. "I mean, I knew it was a long shot, but I thought that after 8 hours we would have at least found something."
Sirius sighed.
"Logically, there really wasn't a large chance of success," he admitted. "I know you three want to go back and keep searching, but not until we can narrow down the amount of ground we have to cover."
He held up a hand at the teenagers' protests.
"This is dangerous enough as it is. I won't have us out there wandering around every night just hoping we stumble across something. Bring us a solid lead and we'll go back. That's final."
The 3 teenagers knew he meant it, so with final goodbyes and goodnights, Neville and Ginny returned home. Sirius gave Harry a consoling hug before he returned to the Bones estate, and Remus to Tonks's apartment. Harry let out a sigh before he headed upstairs to get a few hours of sleep. Minerva was equally disappointed at their lack of success when they told her, but agreed wholeheartedly with Sirius that they not return until they had a better idea of where to search. With the horcrux hunt put on hold for the moment, Harry and his friends turned their attention to Bill and Fleur's wedding, set for just 3 days away. Bill's anxiety was being eclipsed only by his mother's, as she fretted over the state of the borough. Fleur's parents and younger sister would be arriving the next day, and would be staying with them, so Molly was anxious to make sure that everything was perfect. Harry had gotten quite an earful from both Ron and Ginny, who were on their last nerve over their mother insisting they help clean the house from top to bottom. As Ron had put it,
"They're not going to be staying in my room, so why do I have to clean it?"
Harry thought he had an idea as to why, but didn't say anything. Molly was worried about how her soon-to-be daughter-in-law's parents would see their family. The Weasleys weren't exactly rich, and Molly didn't want to be looked down on for that. Harry could understand after all. He had been looked down on for 10 years of his life, by his aunt and uncle, and the entire neighbourhood surrounding Privet Drive. The day before the wedding, Harry and Minerva went over to the Burrow for supper, on Molly's request. They hadn't wanted to burden the Weasley matriarch any more than she already was, but the woman had insisted, so they flew over promptly on time, greeting the Weasleys currently in residence. Harry was immediately accosted by Charlie, who had arrived the day before, and whom Harry hadn't seen since his 4th year.
"Harry!" The burly redhead grinned, grasping him in a friendly hug. "So good to see you again."
Harry smiled as Charlie pulled away.
"You too, Charlie. How are the dragons? Charlie nodded eagerly. Doing great, of course. We just got a new Chinese fireball, and that's got a bit of a temper, but we're working on her.
Harry's smile widened. Charlie really did love his dragons.
So, how's Norbert?
Harry asked quietly, glancing worriedly over at the adults to make sure they weren't paying attention. He didn't want Aunt Minerva to find out there really had been a dragon in his first year. Charlie chuckled and glanced from Harry to Ron and Hermione, who came up to greet their friend.
I think you mean Norberta.
Harry raised an eyebrow, and Charlie shrugged.
Females of the species are usually more vicious.
Harry snorted.
Hate to break it to you, mate, but I don't think that's specific to dragons.
Care to repeat that, dear? Ginny asked archly, sidling up to Harry's side. Harry gulped and looked down into his wife's amused brown eyes.
Nothing, Gin. I said absolutely nothing. I think you're amazing and brilliant, and completely too good for me.
Ginny huffed, standing on her toes to give Harry a kiss. No fair, mentally. You know I can never stay mad at you. Harry grinned cheekily.
All part of my master plan.
Charlie started tapping his foot impatiently, while Ron and Hermione just rolled their eyes, knowing that the two could be lost in each other for a while. Thankfully, Molly appeared at that moment and ushered them all outside for supper. While the Weasley matriarch was fetching the meal, Harry was introduced to the rest of the Delacours, who had arrived 2 days earlier. Monsieur and Madame Delacour were delighted to be introduced to the young man they had met briefly on the day of the third task of the Triwizard Tournament several years earlier. Fleur smiled at her little sister's sudden shyness as she ushered the 11-year-old forward. Come on now, Gabrielle. You remember Harry, don't you? Gabrielle's blush deepened and she nodded. Harry grinned as he held out his hand. Gabrielle took it hesitantly, her face nearly Weasley red.
It's nice to see you again, Gabrielle. How have you been?
Gabrielle ducked her head and muttered something unintelligible, quickly dropping Harry's hand and ducking back to her mother's side. Molly arrived at that moment, levitating the food to the table, and everyone took a seat.
So, are you excited about the wedding?
Harry asked as they helped themselves to the food, finding himself seated next to the elder Delacours. Francis Delacour beamed down at the table at his daughter, seated next to her soon-to-be husband.
It is quite happy news, he confirmed, looking back at Harry. We are so proud of our daughter.
Apolline nodded quickly, her own expression mirroring her husband's. Of course, we are thrilled, she smiled. Kilian is a wonderful man. Harry nodded, happy that they accepted the union. He had been worried after seeing the way Fleur had moved to a different country and had not had much contact with her family in the last few years, that they may have been disappointed in her choices. Clearly, they just wanted their daughter to be happy. The meal passed by peacefully, and after all they were finished, Molly, Fleur and Minerva began clearing the table, while the rest drifted off into separate conversations. Apolline watched knowingly as Harry and Ginny came together in one corner of the yard, almost as if drawn to each other by magic. The two teenagers glowed with an ethereal energy she knew not many could see. She was still watching them when she felt her daughter come to her side. It is amazing, isn't it? Fleur muttered, her gaze likewise fixed on the young couple. It is, agreed Apolline, especially for a bond that has not been completed. Those two will be the force to be reckoned with, I am sure of it. Apolline glanced over at her daughter and smiled. England has been good for you, ma chérie, she commented. I had my doubts when you announced your decision to move, but I am glad you have found yourself. I am proud of you, Fleur. So proud. Fleur sniffed, few tears falling from her eyes, though of course it did nothing to dim her beauty. Thank you, ma mère. Je t'aime. Apolline reached over and brushed her daughter's cheek with one perfectly manicured hand. Je t'aime, ma belle. A short while later, Harry excused himself from Ginny's side, wanting to carry out a small mission he had set for himself. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to succeed. Ginny gave him a calculating look as he left, knowing that he was keeping something from her, but not pushing. She knew that it wasn't serious, so she was content to let him keep his secrets. After all, if he was keeping it from her, he had to have a reason for it. Her money was on some sort of surprise for her birthday. Harry was pleased that Ginny hadn't guessed what he was up to yet. Though they could keep secrets, it wasn't easy. The two had eventually managed to create a sort of locked room in their minds, where they could keep thoughts they didn't want the other to know about. Neither really had much in that section of their minds, but it was nice to have the ability to keep secrets if they needed to. Harry entered the kitchen, finding the two people he had been looking for.
Molly? Arthur, do you mind if I speak with you for a minute? Alone?
The two Weasleys looked at each other briefly before nodding and following Harry out of the room.
Our bedroom may be best, Arthur suggested. With so many people here, I doubt we'll find much privacy elsewhere.
Harry agreed, and let Arthur lead the way to their room. Once there, Harry set up several privacy wards, before turning back to his mother and father-in-law. He was getting better at seeing them like that, but it was still strange to think about. Molly frowned worriedly.
Is everything all right, Harry dear? Why all the need for secrecy?
Harry gulped, but steeled himself to say what he had come here to say.
Molly, Arthur, when Ginny and I told you about our bond last summer, we made a deal that you could trust us, and that we would behave responsibly.
Arthur nodded slowly.
We did,
he confirmed. Do you think we haven't been keeping our end of it? Harry shook his head immediately.
Absolutely not. In fact, I'd like to thank you for your level-headedness for trusting me the way you do. I know that not many others would do the same.
Molly's frown deepened. Then what is this about? Harry took a deep breath.
Ginny's 16th birthday is just over a week away, and I want to do something special for her.
Like what? Arthur asked, apprehension and curiosity warring for the dominant emotion in his voice. Harry licked his lips nervously.
I don't want to give too much away, just in case Ginny was going to try and get something out of you. I'm just asking for your blessing and taking her out for the night. Your blessing, not your permission,
he clarified when it looked like Molly was about to say no.
Remember, we are technically adults. I do not need your permission to do anything. But I don't want you to worry if she didn't come home that night.
I think we want to know what you are planning on doing all night, Arthur asked, one eyebrow raised. Harry grimaced slightly.
Again, I don't want Ginny to know. I want it to be a surprise. But I promise that we won't be in any danger, and we won't do anything irresponsible.
Arthur turned to Molly, his expression clearly admitting his agreement. Molly shook her head.
Arthur, I don't want... We don't have a choice, Molly,
Arthur interrupted.
Harry's right. They can do what they want without our permission.
He looked at Harry.
Thank you for thinking of us and letting us know that you may be gone all night, so that we won't worry. And we do trust you, Harry. We're just having a hard time watching our little girl grow up so quickly. We thought we'd have more time to let her go.
Harry nodded a little guiltily.
I appreciate your efforts. I know it must be hard, but it means a lot to both of us that you're trying. You know we would never truly disappear from your lives, right?
Both parents nodded.
Of course, Harry,
Molly said, tearing up slightly. We're very proud of the way you have both handled this. Harry blushed a little, ducking his head.
You two are like the first parents I've ever known. You took me in immediately, and you didn't have to.
Harry, Arthur started, but the teenager shook his head, cutting the older man off.
No, you really were under no obligation to. I just showed up on your doorstep one morning. You could have sent me back, but you didn't.
We would never have done that, Molly protested. You were Ron's friend, and you needed a place to stay for the rest of the summer. We would never have cast you out. Harry smiled brightly.
Exactly. I was just Ron's friend. But you took me into your family and showed me what it was really like. To be cared for, accepted unconditionally. I had never known what a real family was like before I met you.
Molly teared up and then spilled over as she rushed forward and grasped Harry in a tight hug. Oh, sweetheart. We loved you right from the start, she murmured through the tears. We will always love you, no matter what. Family is about sticking together, through thick and thin. Harry nodded as she pulled back, feeling himself choke up a bit at the obvious and genuine caring both Weasleys were displaying.
Molly's right, Arthur said. Even if you make mistakes, we'll still be there. Because that's what family does. Always.
Harry nodded again, feeling the floor draw his eye as embarrassment took over.
Aunt Minerva's probably looking for me, so we can go home,
he muttered, hoping the excuse would fly. It did, as Molly and Arthur recognised his need to end the conversation and the uncomfortable turn it had taken. Very well, Harry dear, Molly smiled. We shall see you tomorrow morning, then. Harry nodded quickly.
Yes, I'll be here early to help with the last-minute preparations.
He then took down the privacy wards and headed downstairs immediately, still embarrassed. Molly looked at Arthur and felt the tears threatening again.
Oh, Arthur, she murmured. That poor boy.
Arthur nodded somberly.
We can only be thankful that his strength of character was so much that those rotten Dursleys couldn't destroy him. He's an amazing young man, Molly. And even if it happened entirely too soon, I am grateful that Ginny has him. And that he has Ginny. I think he needs her, if I'm being honest. I think he needs her to keep him grounded, to protect him, and perhaps to remind him of what we're all fighting for in this war.
What's that? Molly asked, snuggling into her husband.
Hope. A future we can live without fear. Happiness.
Molly sniffed. He really is a wonderful young man. I think Ron sitting in his compartment on the train, their first year, may have been the best things to happen to this family in a long time. Arthur nodded absent-mindedly.
I believe I agree with you.
The next morning dawned bright and clear, and everyone involved in the wedding was up early to getting the last-minute details sorted. Harry flew over around 8 o'clock and was immediately pressed into service sorting wedding gifts with Ron and Ginny upon his arrival. Once the gifts were sorted, they went outside to help finishing decorating the yard. Hermione was already there, charming the leaves of the crab-apple tree silver. She blushed prettily when Ron complimented her wand work, and Harry and Ginny had to avoid each other's gazes as to not laugh. Ron and Harry went to join Arthur, Sirius and Ron's brothers in raising the large tent where the ceremony would take place, while Ginny helped Hermione finish the decorations. Molly ushered everyone inside around noon, where she plied them all with sandwiches to tide them over until the reception. As the ceremony was set to begin in just under 2 hours, and since the yard was pretty much set, everyone disappeared into various bedrooms to get ready. Harry had brought his suit with him so he wouldn't get it dirty in the morning. He and Ron were quickly changed and ready, but from experience Harry knew that the girls would take longer, so he led Ron downstairs to see if there was anything else they could do to help. When Harry suppressed a laugh for the 3rd time, Ron finally looked over at him and raised an eyebrow.
What's going on?
He asked, only slightly curiously. Harry glanced up, startled.
Sorry, he replied sheepishly. Ginny's just expressing her distaste for playing dress-up.
He winced suddenly and then grimaced.
And now she's chewing me out for not being sympathetic enough. Ron snorted. Your headache, not mine, he said almost gleefully.
Harry glared at him but didn't respond, and the two spent some time cleaning up the kitchen for Molly so that she could get ready. Half an hour before the ceremony was to begin, Harry and Ron headed outside with Charlie and the twins to greet guests and lead them down the road leading to the burrow. Because of the wards surrounding the property, it was necessary for guests to apparate to the end of the road, since it was impossible to apparate through the wards. Harry and the Weasleys would be on hand to lead guests down the road. For the next half hour they were all busy herding various relatives and friends of the Weasleys and Delacours up the path. Harry and Ron had a good laugh at the fight Fred and George had over 2 of Fleur's Vila cousins in the tent. Harry ended up escorting Susan, Neville and Augusta when they arrived. Amelia had come earlier, as she would be the one performing the ceremony. That, of course, meant there needed to be a congregant of Aurors present, something Bill and Fleur weren't exactly keen on, since this was their wedding day and they didn't want to be overshadowed by the war. but understanding the necessity, they agreed, as Kingsley and Tonks had already been invited. That meant only 3 more Aurors needed to be there. They were all part of Amelia's personal guard and had been vetted, which eased most of their minds over the idea of having people they didn't really know at their ceremony. As Harry returned from seeing his friends to their seats, he grinned and nodded a hello towards Ted, Andromeda, and Remus, who had arrived together and were currently heading down the path with Ron. After several more trips where he showed a group of Weasley cousins, Fleur's aunt and uncle, Hagrid, and Ignatius Pruitt and his wife Lucretia Pruitt, née Black, Sirius's aunt, Harry once more met up with Ron at the entrance to the backyard. Ron had just seated Cyrus Greengrass, Madame Zabini, and their respective children, and both felt the need to take a break for a minute, as the flow of guests had started to slow. "There you boys are!" The boys looked over to see Hermione hurrying towards them. "Mrs. Weasley said to take your places now. The ceremony is going to begin soon."
Ron gaped for a moment, before moving forward and giving his girlfriend a kiss. "You look amazing, Hermione,"
he said, pulling back. Hermione blushed and glanced down at her lavender dress. It did a good job of showing off her slim and athletic figure. "Thank you," she replied, smiling happily. The trio headed towards the tent, where Ron had left them to go and find Bill and Charlie, and Harry and Hermione took 2 seats that had been saved for them by Fred and George. They had been startled when Molly had told them they were to sit with the family, but they really shouldn't have been, considering Molly had pretty much adopted them as soon as she had met them after their first year. Even before then, Harry thought, remembering the Weasley jumper he had been given for his very first Christmas at Hogwarts. A short while later, Amelia took her place at the altar, and then music began to play, from a band off to one side. Bill walked down the aisle, accompanied by his parents on either side of him. When they reached the altar, Bill gave his mother a kiss on the cheek, and his father a quick hug, before stepping up to stand in front of Amelia. The music changed slightly, as Ginny made her way down the aisle next, accompanied by Ron. Harry had to remind himself to keep his mouth closed as he watched his wife walk by him. She was wearing a beautiful strapless dress in a shimmering silver. It cut off just below her knees and hugged all of her curves just right. As she passed Harry's seat, Ginny turned slightly to look at him and winked. Harry stifled a groan, knowing that she was doing this on purpose. The next down the aisle were Gabrielle and Charlie. Gabrielle was wearing a dress similar to Ginny's, except hers had straps, since she was, after all, only 11, and strapless was just a bit too mature for her, according to Molly. The Weasley matriarch felt she had gotten quite lucky with this dress, since most of it had been done off of the measurements Fleur had received from her mother, with just a bit of last-minute tweaking when Gabrielle had arrived. The music swelled to a crescendo, and everyone stood up as Fleur made her appearance, with her father at her side. They walked down the aisle, and Harry heard more than one wizard sighing wistfully after her. Her dress was gorgeous and only enhanced her own natural beauty. Normally, Fleur's near-perfect looks had a way of almost dimming her surroundings, but today she only enhanced them. Her love and happiness radiated from her, so tangible they could all feel it. The ceremony was brief, and before long, Bill and Fleur were kissing as husband and wife. Everyone stood up, cheering, and the waiters, who had been standing ready for just this moment, raised their wands. With a few flicks and swishes, the chairs everyone had been using were gone, and in their place was the reception space. Tables were set up around a large dance floor. A table off to one side held up hors d'oeuvres, and the band was now placed along the dance floor. The guests began to mingle, with people going up to congratulate the new couple. Harry didn't want to get caught up in that crowd right now, so he headed towards the table with the food, letting Ginny know through their bond that he would be getting something for them to eat and grab a table. She thanked him and promised to meet him there as soon as she could extract herself from the crowd. Harry was waiting nearly 5 minutes before Ginny finally sat down next to him with an irritated huff. "Why couldn't they let me go?" she grumbled. "It's Bill and Fleur they want to congratulate, not me." Harry smiled and gave her a quick kiss. "You look amazing," he said softly. his eyes shining with love for the young woman in front of him. Ginny blushed and smiled back. "Thanks. You look pretty good yourself." She then tucked into the plate of food Harry had gathered, her stomach growling with hunger. She had had only half a sandwich at lunchtime. They were soon joined by the rest of their friends as they got their own plates and drinks. Shortly before the meal was to be served, Harry was interrupted from a conversation with Ginny and Daphne about improvements that could be made to the calming draught by someone clearing his throat behind him. Harry turned quickly and stood to greet Percy. Percy smiled and held up his hand for Harry to shake.
"It's good to see you again, Harry." "You as well," Harry greeted. "Amelia says you've been settling in well at your new job."
Percy grinned, happy that the minister was saying good things about him. Over the last few weeks he had been studying occlumency, while also trying to keep an ear out for potential threats. He had passed on several interesting conversations he had overheard, and hoped that he was slowly redeeming himself to his family. He wanted their forgiveness, but mostly, he wanted to show them that he knew he had been wrong, and that he was changing. Percy lowered his voice slightly.
"I've read the book you sent me, and I've been working on the exercises it suggests. I was hoping you might be able to test me sometime."
Harry nodded slightly.
"I'd be happy to. And after I go back to school, I can put you in touch with the man who taught us. But for now, let's just enjoy the night."
Percy grinned.
"Good idea. This isn't the time for serious conversations. I'm going to get some food, but I'll see you all later." He looked at Ginny. "You look beautiful, Ginny. I can't believe how grown up you've gotten."
Ginny smiled. "Thanks, Percy." Percy left and Harry sat back down. Laughter and happy voices filled the tent as people ate their supper. Once they were finished, the band began to play again, as people began to make their way onto the dance floor. Harry immediately offered his hand to Ginny, and the couple were soon joined by Neville and Susan, Blaise and Luna, and after a brief pause, Ron and Hermione. Sirius watched the young couples make their way onto the dance floor and smiled. He remembered seeing Harry the summer before his third year, and the change was startling. 13-year-old Harry had been shorter than he should be, and much skinnier than was healthy. He had been skittish and much less sure of himself. This Harry was tall and muscular, with a calming aura that told everyone he was happy with who he was. A presence settled on his right, and Sirius looked over, startled. And then he swallowed, harshly, as the aunt he hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades spoke. "A wonderful occasion, do you not agree?" Sirius nodded mutely, and Lucretia gave him a razor-sharp smile. "I have not yet had the opportunity to congratulate you on your release, Sirius, or your marriage. A commendable match. Though we were never that close, I do care for you. You are my nephew, and I did not agree with the decisions my brother made concerning you. I think you did a good thing in escaping that house. James Potter was good for you." Sirius nodded, surprised. He hadn't known his father's sister that well growing up, but he did know the family politics. Lucretia's smile, if possible, got even thinner. "I am not saying I agree with the Potters' beliefs, but they are at least an honourable family, and if they were willing to look past the black name to welcome you into their home, then they cannot have been all bad." Sirius felt himself smile as he nodded.
"They were the best."
His gaze turned back to Harry, who was now dancing with Hermione, while Ron had taken his spot with Ginny.
"Harry has the best of his parents in him."
Lucretia rested a hand on Sirius's shoulder. "I don't doubt that at all. It was good to see you again, Sirius. Please don't be a stranger." Sirius nodded and watched his aunt walk away. She joined her husband near the edge of the tent, and a few minutes later they were leaving. It was starting to get late, and guests were beginning to take their leave. Augusta left before Neville, and the senior Tonkses before the younger one, partly because she didn't want to leave just yet, enjoying herself in Remus's arms, and partially because she was still supposed to be protecting the minister. Finally, near midnight, the rest of the party began to break up for real. Bill and Fleur headed out after changing into more practical clothes. Their wedding gift from their parents, along with Sirius, Minerva and Augusta, was a small cottage in the south of England, on the skirts of Tinworth in Cornwall, right on the ocean. The land had originally belonged to a relative of Arthur's, who had unfortunately passed away years earlier, when the home had been destroyed in a fire. The land had been inherited by Arthur at that point, but he hadn't done anything with it. However, he and Molly thought it might be a wonderful setting for Bill and Fleur's home. So, together, the adults had hired a crew to rebuild the destroyed home. Augusta and Molly had designed the interior, and Sirius had gotten the goblins to ward it similar to McGonagall Castle. They had been working on this gift ever since Bill had announced his engagement the previous summer. Once the bride and groom had left, there wasn't much reason for anyone else to stick around. After saying their goodbyes, the guests dispersed. Harry and his friends were the last to depart, after promising to see each other soon. Soon enough, the only ones left at the Burrow were those that lived there. A few days later was Ginny's 16th birthday. She had had an early party at the Burrow, since Harry had requested an evening out for the two of them. Molly cooked up an impressive brunch spread for all of Ginny's friends. After eating, Ginny opened presents, before they spent the rest of the afternoon playing Quidditch. When the afternoon turned into early evening, most of the teenagers began to depart. Harry told Ginny to change into something nice and meet him at McGonagall Castle, before he gave her a kiss and stepped through the Fleur. Ginny questioned her parents briefly, but all they said was that they had given Harry their blessing to take her out for the evening. Molly gave her a kiss on the cheek and told her to have some fun, and Ginny hurriedly went upstairs to find something suitable to wear. At McGonagall Castle, Harry had put on a dress shirt and a pair of slacks, and was now waiting nervously in the sitting room, one hand tapping an uneasy rhythm on his knee. 15 minutes later, Ginny flew over, and Harry stood up quickly.
"You look amazing, Gin,"
he said, smiling, giving her a kiss. Ginny returned the grin. "Thanks." She looked down at her knee-length dress. It was a chocolate brown v-neck with wide straps, and a gold band around the waist. On her left hand was the engagement ring Harry had given her, one that she normally wore disillusioned on a chain around her neck. Harry picked some imaginary lint off of the sleeve of his royal blue shirt, before suggesting that they leave. Ginny raised an eyebrow. "I would, but you haven't told me where we're going." Harry blushed slightly.
"Sorry, we're going to Potter Manor."
Ginny nodded and stepped through the Fleur, followed quickly by Harry. When they arrived at Harry's ancestral home, Harry led Ginny up 2 floors and down the hall to the master suite. Ginny gasped as the double doors swung open. There were candles everywhere. The king-sized bed was littered with rose petals. There were bouquets of roses in every corner, on every surface. Harry led her past the beautifully decorated room, onto the outdoor terrace that had been hidden by the double French doors. The outside was set up much like indoors. There were candles and roses everywhere. "Oh, Harry, this is gorgeous!" Ginny kept looking around, her eyes wide. Harry took her hand, beaming.
"You told me it had to be special, and I mean to deliver."
Food suddenly appeared on the table, and Harry led Ginny to her seat. The house elves had done a wonderful job preparing this meal. There was a lobster bisque to begin with, and then roast beef, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, brioche buns, and for dessert, chocolate bread pudding. They enjoyed the meal slowly, taking the time to relax and talk to each other. With the war and everything else going on, they hadn't really had much time lately to just be alone with each other, without some sort of task that needed to be carried out. Once they had both finished their dessert, Harry stood up and held out a hand. Ginny took the offered limb and stood up as well. Together, the couple headed back inside. Suddenly nervous, Harry turned to Ginny.
"If you don't want to do this."
Ginny shook her head immediately. "I want to, Harry. I've waited for this night for so long." Harry smiled.
"Me too."
They stepped towards the bed. Harry turned the covers down. He looked back at Ginny.
"I performed the contraceptive charm before you arrived at McGonagall Castle. It lasts for 12 hours.
So we're all set. Good, Ginny murmured, trying to figure out why she was so shy of it all of a sudden. This was Harry. They were soul bonded. He was her husband. So why was she so nervous? Probably because it was the first time he had ever seen her nude, she realised ruefully. Suddenly, she felt her face being lifted upwards gently. Harry's fingers rested under her chin, and she looked into his warm and compassionate gaze. His eyes really were a startlingly emerald green, she thought randomly. Harry smiled, catching that thought. Mentally, he said,
I love you, Geneva and Molly Potter. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want this, but only if you're ready. It's all right if you're not.
Ginny shook her head, her nerves suddenly gone. I'm ready. She reached towards him and grasped his neck, pulling his lips down to meet her own. Together, the two fell backwards onto the bed. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this one. Oh, I'm loving that chapter. That's really nice. All of the stuff with the horcrux, and yeah, they're not going to find it immediately, so it makes sense that they didn't find it at once. And the wedding ended much better than the original. I'm just going to say that. Absolutely gorgeous. Loving it. And I like that they didn't go too far in with what happens with Ginny and Harry consummating their relationship. As much as I'm happy for the two of them, and I know they're adults in this, I grew up knowing these stories since I was literally 2 years old, so that's a little weird. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.